Welcome to the fourth panel of the day of our Securities Finance Symposium Technology North America version. So far we've had some pretty strong panels, very in-depth, very professional, very pragmatic. I hope this continues. The topic of the next panel is centralized treasury and its technology. So please let me introduce, I don't know if I get the name right. It's a very complicated name. Is it Roy? Is that it? Roy? Ray, maybe? Roy? Zimmerhansel. Roy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Frediani. I will pretty much answer to anything. But yes, I'm Roy Zimmerhansel. Thanks very much for the introduction. And fortunately, the pressure of all the outstanding panels that have actually preceded us, I feel pretty confident about, because this is an excellent panel. So I'm really pleased to be with it. Again, I'm Roy Zimmerhansel. I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves. I am the principal and founder of PeerPoint Financial Consulting, where we focus laser focused on securities finance, including securities lending, repo, and collateral management. So that's what I do. Now, Sophie, maybe you can go next.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for hosting the panel. I am Sophie Manifoy. I am a director in product management, working for Calypso Technology, and I've been working very closely to the regulatory changes and the impact on collateral and tech finance, as well as risk regulation.
Thanks, Sophie. Mark, over to you.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Mark Bailey. I'm a managing director at Two Sigma Investments based in New York. We are a quantitative systematic investment firm managing around $58 billion worth of capital in a number of different strategies, systematic equities, as well as systematic macro.
Thanks, Mark. Guido, how about you?
Sure. My name is Guido Stromer, co-founder of HQLA, which is a fintech startup that leverages distributed ledger technology to tokenize baskets of securities to enable our clients to seamlessly transfer ownership of collateral across a fragmented custody space.
Thanks very much, Guido. And Ted, over to you.
Carlsberg did panels here, right? What a group we've got here. I look after business development for securities finance and collateral at FIS. I'm sure most of the audience will know FIS. We do lots of different things, but in particular within securities finance and collateral, we've really been at the, I guess, the heart of the industry for 3 decades or more, with our products like LoanNet and Global One and Apex and so forth. So I work on those as well as our collateral product, and latterly I've been working on our global inventory and optimization initiative.
Right, thanks very much, Ted. And last but not least, Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Roy. Chris Hagstrom, the CEO of Kayenta. We are transforming treasury technology. My background on the sell side for 28 years at Bear Stearns, SG, and most recently UBS. And throughout my career was overseeing financing businesses, managing hedge fund relationships. So excited to be here and to tell you more about what we're doing at Kayenta. Thanks, Roy.
Great stuff. Thanks, Chris. And just so everyone in the audience knows, I did that out of sequence just to make certain the panel was awake and lively. So they all handled that brilliantly. Look, I've been listening to all of the sessions so far today, and I have to say it's been excellent. And it definitely, I would agree with Gabs that the standard's been pretty high. But as I said, I think this is going to be a pretty good panel. But I've been lucky because for most of the 90s, I was part of Treasury myself in 2 different banks, 2 out of the 3 banks I worked at. And it was really through the sheer force of will and knowledge that both of the treasurers that I worked for really made the Treasury function a central part of those banks' operations. And so I was really quite surprised when I got into this century and went into work for other banks and saw that that wasn't the case everywhere. And then when the GFC started in the summer of 2007, a lot of banks discovered, yeah, actually, we don't really just need to borrow cash all the time. We have assets we can use. And I'm going like, which decade am I in? And I could have said which century. And so I think that what we saw is really this, that the GFC kicked off a change to Treasury from being a kind of an after the fact kind of sweeping up operation that made certain the organization could keep funded to keep operating and really become a central function. And then as regulations have come in over the past decade, it really is now essential to how any organization runs just to carry on doing business. But more importantly, has become even more forward focused. Now, the key thing here, as we get into more activity, is it's all driven by technology, and that's what our panel is here to talk about. Now, we thought that a good place to start would actually be to get that kind of customer perspective. And I'm wondering, Mark, if you could kind of lead us off with that conversation.
Well, thanks, Roy. So, absolutely. And ironically, many of the points that you've made around the global financial crisis and the sea change that happened back in 2008, we are still living and breathing those effects today. So let's just talk about what the objective function for a treasurer is in my view, or in many of my peers' view. It's really about maximizing liquidity and maximizing the access to cash collateral at all times, knowing where it is and how to get to it, move it around efficiently. So you're looking to maximize that liquidity whilst minimizing the credit profile that you're taking and that you have assumed. Clearly, there's a revenue angle. So that's third, but not necessarily last and third, but very important to put that in the context of the risk that you're assuming. So if you go all the way back to Roy's point, to the crises of the past, and whether it be long-term capital, whether it be bearings, the global financial crisis, whether it be the sovereign debt crisis in Europe in 2011, or it be more recent GameStop, Archegos, all of these ultimately lead or led to the demise of firms through a loss of liquidity and through the loss of the ability to move that collateral and to make good on their obligations. Clearly, there's a reduction in equity value and a destruction of creditworthiness, but all of that cycles through very frequently the liquidity profile change first. So the Treasury technology, in my opinion, is fundamental to understanding where your cash, where your collateral is, and how you move it around. So Chris and I have been on other sides of the fence from each other for many years, working together, sparring in some ways, trying to build that equilibrium between a service provider, him at UBS, me at 2 Sigma, and trying to build that equilibrium that the bank is happy and the customer is happy, and the liquidity that we need, the leverage that we need, is balanced. So many of the points that a need for Treasury technology and Treasury expertise derive, as you pointed out, Roy, from regulatory changes that came into existence from the global financial crisis. We all know the acronyms: SLR, LCR, NSFR, you can go on, GSIB. What all of those fancy words and letters mean is that the need for data to support the case, to support the liquidity profile of an organization is absolutely fundamental. That is the lifeblood today of an organization. So being able to connect to that data and being able to use it is what banks have been doing since 2008. But as a hedge fund community and treasurer community within those hedge funds, we're not late to the game, but we're now needing to be able to have that conversation with our peers in the banks using the language that they've had to adopt through those regulations. So in many ways, I see a bleed through of those regulations through to the banks affecting the technology that they needed, that they had to build, to the hedge fund community and the technology that we have and had to know how to use and deploy. And that allows you to have conversations very effectively with your peers. But in short, that's the genesis of where we are today and why technology and the data that it allows us to expose and mine and use is so important. Back to you, Roy.
Thanks, Mark. So I guess we can come back to this later, but it'll be interesting. You kind of mapped out how banks led the process of really bringing together the information, and hedge funds are kind of following it and accelerating it. So we might come back and revisit that. But Sophie, I want to turn to you now, because what a lot of what Mark talked about and a lot of what today has talked about is the functional process of getting that information together and taking action on it. But I'm wondering if you can give us some perspective. Is there more to it than just the actual sort of processing and gathering of information?
Yes, right. Thank you for asking that question. So the foundation of an optimized treasury management, as Mark was mentioning, definitely starts with a full integration between securities finance and collateral in a real-time environment. The resulting holistic view will lead to inventory optimization and collateral cost reduction. Driving collateral fluidity, transformation optimization is definitely strategic, right? But is that enough to efficiently optimize collateral in 2021? Well, maybe not. So let's review why. In the current environment of increased regulatory requirements, increased focus on counterparty credit risk, and market fluctuation, there are two key new market best practices that I would like to talk about to kind of shed some light on that regulatory background around collateral management and collateral optimization. The first one is how collateral and risk are now fully interdependent. And the second one is the timing of the collateral optimization and seeing how collateral optimization now will have to be integrated basically at every stage of a trade life cycle. So let's review those two market trends in a little bit of more detail. Starting with the first point, there is a need for risk and collateral to be fully integrated as the industry is adjusting to many regulations, especially the Basel III framework, right? So the Basel III framework is one of the most significant post-crisis reform. It has added new liquidity and capital requirements for banks and financial institutions, as well as an increased demand for collateral in the context of clearing, uncleared margin rules, and beyond. I'll spare you the acronyms, but there is a long list. And Basel changes the entire dynamic of the trading process, as every single transaction now generates collateral demand, and capital cost, right? So interestingly, when you analyze the new total cost of the trade and the related new regulatory risk metrics, there is one common denominator: collateral. Collateral parameters and exposures are key input to every single risk calculation of SACCR, counterparty credit risk, Monte Carlo PFE exposure, CVA and MVA. Sorry, I could not avoid the acronyms here. The new Basel framework also requires key collateral inputs related to dispute information, settlement delays, unsettled flows that need to be added to the new regulatory risk matrix. And in parallel, the collateral exposure itself, that will be the input for the treasury management, used to determine the collateral to pledge or hold, is now based on more complex risk calculation. Indeed, the market has shifted from simple market value-based exposure to VaR-based, sensitivity-based initial margin calculation, which are not additive anymore and which require very heavy technology behind the scenes to calculate that exposure, collateral exposure, correctly, right? And each of those measures need to be adjusted, simulated, recalculated, very often intraday and quickly. Right? To take an example, in 2020, we have seen banks, firms, clearing houses having to control the margin pro-cyclicality effect on the collateral flows. And it was necessary to have this full integration to avoid unmanageable collateral calls. I think in 2020, we saw a little bit of warning effects, but it was controlled because institution had an integrated framework. So how best, right, to manage all of that than in a risk and collateral integrated platform? So what does it mean for financial institutions? Well, it means that the collateral and risk functions are now clearly interdependent. And without this integration, efficient risk and collateral management will be complicated and compromised, right? But this new layer of complexity, it's also an opportunity for optimization and competitive advantage. If you have this integrated solution, then you will be able to achieve not only regulatory compliance, but collateral and cost optimization and keep your profitability of your business up.
So you're really saying that they aren't mutually exclusive. Satisfying the regulations and optimization aren't necessarily, sort of competitive actions. They can be sort of holistically, commonly sort of put together, and they kind of have the same end goal. I'm wondering, can you just give us a brief comment on how you can take that kind of sort of collateral optimization and put it into an integrated life cycle?
Yes, right. I think that's a perfect summary of the first point I was trying to make. And that brings me to that second point, which is also the answer to your question, which is what should be the ultimate timing of collateral optimization. Indeed, the times of viewing collateral as a sequential process downstream from trade negotiation and execution, they are gone. Collateral management starts before trades are negotiated. And actually, sometimes it starts months before the trades are negotiated. Let me illustrate that point with an example. Hundreds of firms today are actively getting ready for their UMR and cleared margin rules compliance, September 2021, as part of the Group 5 UMR compliance. Many of those firms are planning to proactively anticipate their collateral needs and actually avoid exchanges collateral altogether. How does it work? Well, the regulation allows firms to not exchange collateral if the total initial margin exposure is below the UMR threshold. So if you manage to reduce your collateral exposure to zero, then clearly that's the best optimization, right? But for that to happen, it needs to take place before the trades are booked, executed, or even anticipated. And we are seeing clients running simulation months in advance using legacy portfolios and anticipate and manage their UMR threshold. So in the world of clearing, collateral input is also a big part of the mix during the clearing innovation. Where the headroom check process is done, it includes VAR sensitivities, unsettled collateral, again, part of the pre-trade limit check. For our CCP clients, for example, the collateral integration at every stage of a life cycle has been required for a long time. They actually have a mandate to calculate risk metrics in less than 10 seconds using collateral inputs. All of that pre-trade, right? We are talking about collateral request and pre-trade innovation. Finally, with the adoption of the new regulatory metrics, like the standard CCR, SSCCR, Basel regulation, the expansion of clearing volume and UMR, a similar risk and collateral integration is now necessary to stay competitive, right? A trader will actually need to anticipate the impact of all the new regulations upfront. So in conclusion, in 2021, an optimal collateral optimization will need to include an integrated front-to-back solution with real-time exposures and real-time inventory, a solid and flexible risk engine running in the background to provide all the real-time updates and information, and finally, a holistic approach to risk and collateral without sequential steps, where collateral is risk and risk is collateral.
Great, Sophie. Thanks very much. So I think all the audience, you've just got an entire bonus session masterclass on integrating collateral and regulations there. So thanks for that. I want to turn now to Ted. Ted, I think Gabriel described FIS as a company that does everything and is everywhere. So no pressure on you to actually do this, but really, what I really want to do now is try to focus on more practically, kind of where are we now and where are we trying to go? Like what are the solutions that a kind of centralized technology, Treasury technology can provide? So maybe get us started on that.
Oh, and we are 55,000 people, so it's not all on my back. No. There was an awful lot of great content in what Sophie just shared with us, and some of that is obviously already practiced by some of the more sophisticated sell-side organizations. A lot of it is aspirational for many. Clearly, there is one of the responsibilities of the Treasury is to drive best behavior, and that's around what we would you might want to term the margin optimization. I think what Sophie was talking about pre-trade there. So just looking at, and really I'm talking about derivatives rather than securities finance here, but just driving best behavior, optimal counterparty selection, optimal deal selection by looking at the marginal increase in collateral requirements that putting on a particular trade or set of trades might do. And there's a few of us out there who offer some great tools to help with that. So that's kind of the pre-trade thing. Then just kind of unpacking the post-trade thing. You talked earlier about centralization. There's many of the panels, or a couple of the panels earlier on have talked about collateral optimization. So I don't want to repeat too much, but clearly there is a need to centralize that function because of the increased capital requirements and the increased margin requirements coming from UMR. You saw ISDA's end of year margin survey that showed initial margin increased by 23% last year to 208 billion. That's in non-cash, high quality assets, right? That's a huge strain. It's a huge amount of liquidity that the industry has to find, and that has knock-on impacts on repo, on securities lending, and the whole liquidity management process. Collateral optimization or inventory optimization is a great thing in theory. It's really hard in practice because of, well, for a few reasons. One is typically many firms are operating in silos, right? And just gathering that data together in one place is difficult, but normalizing and standardizing that data within a firm is difficult. Looking at it across the industry, it's a much bigger problem to solve. But there's a lot of effort, I think, to be made in consolidating inventory and looking at it centrally first of all. That will allow you to optimize how you allocate the assets across your liquidity management, your collateral requirements, and your securities lending programs, and then also to look at the buffers that you're having to hold for intraday liquidity management. That's a big driver, particularly for the banks. It's huge amounts of capital tied up there. So I think these are some of the big challenges that we need to face, and I don't want to go on for too long.
No, Ted, but we will come back to you, because one of the things I want to know is, do you see, in order to solve for that, do you see the tools already being available and not being applied, or do you think more tools are required in future? So we might come back to that, have a think about that. So thanks for that, Ted. Look, I think that's actually a great introduction for our next two panelists, because both of them are from relatively new firms that are looking to change things. So maybe Chris, quite a lot of what Ted was talking about kind of resonated for me in terms of our conversations outside of this panel. So maybe over to you. Where are we now? Where are we going? And so why do you even exist?
Good question, Roy. Thank you. When I left UBS, I was on a mission to meet with as many of my closest and strongest hedge fund relationships that I could. I spent 3 months meeting probably over 100 hedge funds. There were two big observations from those meetings. The first one was all hedge funds want more assets, stickier assets, or many of them did. And that wasn't my wheelhouse. But the second point was they all had a focus on the Treasury role, and they were trying to find ways to use data to improve it. If you look at the overall financing market, I mean, we're talking about excess of 20 billion in fees in that market. And the costs are high, and there's differing levels of focus and a plan of attack on how you address those costs. If you look at the larger hedge funds, we heard from Mark earlier at 2 Sigma, a larger hedge fund like Mark's is going to care about data and access to information. The mid-tier funds, they know what they want, but they don't have to often have a tech spend or the resources to get there. And then at the smaller end of the hedge funds, where the CFO and the COO wear multiple hats, they also have resource constraints. So the tricky part here was to develop some technology that could span the gamut for all of that feedback. And so that's what Kiant is here to do. We have a management team of folks across our team with over 100 years of experience, both from the buy side, Citadel, Oxif, and from the sell side. And we feel that we understand this challenge in the market from the inside, and we know how to solve it. So if you look at the problem, the market's struggling with gathering, normalizing, and comparing all this financing data. It's an issue for both the prime brokers and the hedge funds. And we've spoken about Archegos already in this conversation. It clearly highlights the need for simple access to reliable data. So our solution is giving you access to your normalized, accurate data, helping you understand your costs, optimizing your positions, and helping you control counterparty exposures through your wallet allocation. The hedge fund, in this case of what we're doing, does nothing. So Kiant does all the work for them and then gives them all of these outputs. The mission to develop modern technology was a really key component of what we've done. We had to build it in a scalable fashion. Everything's cloud native. It has to be uber safe. We have containers in the cloud that make it even stronger. It's easy to integrate. We have an API. It's easy to use. We have a shiny front end UI, and it's affordable, which modern technology allows. So if our initial subscription is $35,000 to $50,000 a year, it's much more affordable than some of the things that are out there. Because we developed technology recently, and we did it with a team of pure developers, I believe we've created something really special. In closing, just quickly on the technology, if you think of it like a pyramid, to your question, Roy, what are you solving for? The base of the pyramid is a data lake. And in there, we take inputs from prime brokers, administrators, OMS providers, take in the data, break it down to the trade level, and then recalculate and do independent recs on that data to make sure you're paying your providers what you should be. Then we look at the wallet, not just top line, what am I paying to the street, but because of our inside secret sauce, how much are banks making off of my business and how efficient is the business I'm giving them for them? Because that's a really important point that I think will continue to come up. And then at the top of the pyramid, of course, is just the output, or in the middle of the pyramid, then you have optimization of the data. So you had the data lake, now you do optimizing. Let's say every morning you come in, there's 5 things that you can do to make or save money that's being recommended, which also benefits both the hedge fund and the prime broker. These things do, and I think this is a really important point, whether it's reconciliation, wallet management, optimization, the reason it benefits both sides of the market is the hedge fund can save money, but the banks can get business that's more efficient for them, that they care about. And when I was on the sell side, that's a super important point, and we're striving to bring that value in Kiant. And then, as I said, at the top of the pyramid, it's about summaries and easy to understand outputs for everything I described. We have live clients. We have a robust pipeline. We've already saved one client over $50,000 a month on an annualized basis, not to mention a lot of time in what they're doing at the end of every month. So my closing in this opening, Roy, is when I spoke to hedge funds, they said, build it and we will come. And so that's what we did.
Okay, so that was a paid political advert from Kiant, I think. So I'm not certain if there's any of the business plan that you didn't share with us, but thanks for the details. Look, Chris, I think the thing that I take away from that, though, is it sounds to me like one of the themes you're talking about is something we've heard in all the panels. What you're really doing is taking data that already exists there, combining it and standardizing it, which I think is what every panel has talked about. That standardization has been missing, and really sort of aggregating and presenting it in a useful way. So we may come back to that. Guido, I want to turn to you, because one of the things that always impresses me every time I talk to you is you take kind of a different approach to thought processes and about how we approach this business. And in the prep session for this, you did the same thing. So maybe I can hand over the same thing to you. So where are we now? Where are we going? And why do you exist?
Why do I exist? That's a very good question. Perhaps you can answer that after this panel. So look, in terms of a a treasury function's main goal or main goals really are to manage capital, liquidity risk, credit risk, and operational risk. And many institutions have created what I would call centralized scarce resource functions, oftentimes run by treasury units, to optimize the consumption of scarce resources in terms of capital, liquidity, credit, and operational risk. And more so, we're seeing today that banks are focusing on the consumption of intraday liquidity and intraday credit risk, monitoring that on a real-time basis, and in some instances, beginning to allocate costs for that consumption back to specific business lines and to trading desks. But if we maybe take a macro view on what are the key requirements for a central treasury function to be successful, this is not rocket science. I'm probably going to be repeating some points that were made previously in previous panel discussions, and some of them were, I think, made here as well. But it's three key things. One is getting a real-time view of your balance sheet to better understand in a real-time basis what sources and uses of the balance sheet is. Having an optimization engine to take inputs and to create the desired outputs, and also overlaying that with collateral mobility to enhance the optimization. I think oftentimes those 3 points are actually mentioned in that order, and I would argue that the collateral mobility should actually come second. So you should have a real-time view of your balance sheet and then overlay that with, okay, this is the balance sheet, here's my assets and liabilities are, here's where they need to go. Let's also take a view of the mobility of that balance sheet. And that input of mobility, collateral ownership mobility, really needs to be fed into an optimization engine to then create the optimized output of real-time sources and uses adjusted for collateral mobility of those real-time sources and uses. I talked about intraday liquidity, intraday credit. That's a main focus point of HQLAX. Our platform enables our clients to better manage both of those key financial resources. And one of the things that's quite interesting from my perspective is that many of the institutions that we are onboarding to our platform are pursuing use cases to better manage financial resources internally. What I really mean by is to manage collateral across legal entities of the same parent group. So oftentimes we talk about managing external footprints in the collateral management space, but there's often a huge value proposition in improving collateral mobility within an organization which needs to move collateral from one legal entity to another, either for credit reasons or potentially for liquidity reasons. And to have a real-time view of your balance sheet obviously is very important, but to be able to then transfer ownership of collateral at precise moments in time on a 24/7 basis is something that I believe will be transformative to the securities finance industry over the next several years.
And actually, Guido, that's an interesting point, because arguably that's where everyone should start, and that should be the easiest thing to do in terms of mobilizing things internally. And it's certainly something that's completely critical for many firms as they look at going into UMR for the next phase, where they're actually trying to just within an organization find a way to get it from A to B, and the challenges that separate legal entities might present as well. So is that part of your thinking as well, or is it yeah?
Absolutely, and just to maybe underscore one point, it's also the ability to transfer ownership of assets on a really a 24/7 basis. So not to be constrained by the opening hours of one market versus the other is, in my view, and I'm talking my own book a little bit on this one, I think it's a game-changing development in the securities finance space.
Yeah, look, and I have in my past been located in Hong Kong, chasing down a New York desk to collateralize something that London didn't collateralize. So I feel you there. So thanks. I just want to swing back to Sophie, because you didn't get a chance to actually talk about the additional layer of what customers are asking for that we haven't talked about. So maybe if you can briefly add to that.
Sure. And I would also, echo to what Guido was saying. Data is key. Data consolidation is key. And it's not a simple task to actually achieve that consolidated view of all those silos that were historically there in firms, small or big. So we have seen a consolidation trend where our clients are moving securities finance and collateral into a single platform to manage their inventory more efficiently, real time, and then meet their market requirements around collateral fluidity, right? So we are seeing basically sec finance clients integrated collateral into their Calypso implementation or conversely. But recently, the requirements have changed and expanded as our clients are facing the complexity of that new regulatory framework I was talking about, and the pressure on costs is increasing. And clients have been asking for a complete system with all the asset classes. Why? Because it's the only way to be efficient when you talk about collateral, risk, margin, and all those new regulations, UMR being one of them, right? So simulation are required post-trade for collateral at the trading level and include all key collateral inputs. So more and more of our clients, they are consolidating their systems so that they could combine collateral exposure, assets, liability, and risk function in a single platform. Interestingly, we are working really as partners because I think the market is still looking for the ultimate solution and maybe for the final end game, right? So what I can say at this point is we've identified some key use cases that I believe the market will really need in the next few years. So the first one is as you trade, as you manage your treasury, you need always to identify the cheapest clearing venue and minimize those exposures, especially around initial margin and related collateral costs, right? Always taking into account your entire portfolio. They will want to compare the cost of clearing versus not clearing. It is a new topic that will be a big reality starting in September 2021, when hundreds of new firms become UMR compliant. They will also want to continue and analyze the impact of all their CSA information into their TVA charges, like the threshold, the margin period, and so on. And then I think finally our clients, they are mostly interested in a consolidated and configurable view of all those simulations, right? And as a conclusion, I would say that after dealing with everything that happened in 2020, all those expected events, what our clients are mostly looking for is agile frameworks. They know that they will need to deal with the unexpected and unknown. So for them, starting with a one-stop shop for regulation, risk, and collateral seems to be a very good first step.
Great. Thanks for that, Sophie. Look, I want to now go back to you, Mark, maybe, because we've heard quite a lot of commentary from what people are seeing for clients, and I've been asking what the needs are and what they're asking for. Does all of that resonate for you, what you've been hearing from the other panelists? And maybe what really jumps out at you?
Oh, it certainly does, Roy. This need for the data to be at your fingertips is absolutely essential, and there's no good trying to do it in the middle of a crisis. It needs to be laid out, visible, and working with you every day. So to Sophie's point, combining risk and securities finance and the collateral data, that's absolutely essential. The one area is this integration that is really an area of challenge for a lot of people. We all have multiple prime brokers, multiple administrators, multiple service providers, custodians, collateral banks. Taking this sea of information, the sea of data, the lake that Chris described, and aggregating it is a very challenging task. So I'm lucky I work for an organization with a huge engineering prowess, and we're have people who are very adept at this process. But in organizations that, every organization I worked in, it's still a big challenge, a big lift to take that data and actually get it to a place of use. And that's where I think the industry needs a lot of help. And so firms like Kayento and others, you guys hitting on the nail on the head there. The other thing is we all have solutions embedded in today. So you have an equity finance solution, you have a platform for collateral management. Ripping that out and replacing it with a new one is a very challenging function. So I find that we're buying a lot of systems where we're using portions of them, slivers of them. And it's a bit like the iPhone. I mean, the capabilities are immense, but I use it for sending emails and text messages, and maybe as a phone sometimes. But the whole point being targeting us with the capabilities that we need, not necessarily the whole gambit of availability is really, again, essential, I think, for the average Treasury user. So those are a couple of thoughts. I don't know whether, Chris?
Yeah, maybe Chris, maybe comment to you and then come back to you, Ted, maybe, because that's kind of what I'd ask you after your chat. So Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. You know, I mentioned modern technology, which is cliche, but when you're thinking about how can you quickly integrate all of those providers that Mark described, as well as integrate your technology into existing technology stacks, those are two extremely important parts of kind of how we thought about it going into it. So being in the cloud and being able to bring up a new client instance in a very simple manner is a huge advantage. And so the integration times are less and the costs are less, and the onus on the hedge fund is almost non-existent, which is super important. And Mark's point about modular, I think, you know, when you're building technology now, that makes total sense. You have a baseline, and then there's pieces that you can add on top that clients can either use or not, pay for or not. And so I totally agree and concur with what Mark said.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Ted?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. The days of firms doing, or banks doing a big lift out and replacing all of their systems with one big new system are somewhat over, right? The industry is moving much more to a componentized, federated type architecture that you can easily plug components together, and that's where we are investing. That's how we are re-architecting our products. I mean, we talked earlier about the inventory and the optimization piece. We had that for some years embedded into one of our core platforms. You had to take the whole platform to get that particular piece. What we've done is just in response to exactly this question, is we've taken it out of that. We've componentized it. We've made it cloud native, so it's a very light and easy tool to just deploy over the top of your existing architecture. It's very hard, as someone just said, it's very hard to make the case for replacing an operations system. So what you need is components that you can easily plug in or layer over the top of those. And I wanted to just go back onto an earlier point around the mobilization. I think Guido made the point about mobilization of collateral between the legal entities. That's a problem across the buy side as well as the sell side, right? I mean, we were talking about big banks with operating across multiple geographies. We've just done a project with a big asset manager, specifically driven by UMR. And it was to optimize their collateral allocations along with their securities finance program, but to move collateral between the underlying funds. So you got the right type of assets in the right place at the right time, without having to go externally to the street to do that collateral transformation that was having to happen earlier. And that can all be done within a single optimization run. So that's kind of an interesting, I guess, real world demonstration of how to go about these types of things.
Thanks, Ted. And I'm wondering, Guido, that sounds to me exactly what you were talking about. So there's one thing about sort of knowing that you need to have a certain piece of or collateral in one destination or the other. The challenge often is actually moving that asset, right? Is that what you were talking about earlier?
Absolutely right. I was just going to say, Ted, perhaps you and I should collaborate together to provide a solution to this asset manager that you're speaking to combine a view of collateral mobility on top of the requirement to get the right piece of collateral to the right place at the right time. And oftentimes, when we say get the right piece of collateral to the right place at the right time, it doesn't necessarily mean that the physical asset needs to move. You just need to transfer the ownership at the right time. So, I think there certainly are some significant opportunities in the collateral management space as it relates to UMR for the buy side, to mobilize assets via DLT solutions generally.
And I think Ted's really hit on the essence of the biggest challenge of UMR is on the buy side with funds with multiple, so a fund complex with multiple entities in it that needs to move collateral internally first. That would be the obvious point. So Chris, I'm wondering if we can go to you and just talk about sort of I guess part of the reason you guys need to have a solution is because, the whole idea of having this kind of one central place has been almost impossible to implement, whether that's internally within a bank, which you've worked at banks, or externally at funds that you have multiple providers. And so is information kind of the bridge that allows you to kind of simulate a centralized control?
Yeah, I mean, the way it works now, and many people know, it's, you sit at a hedge fund and you have different entities you're dealing with who present you data in different venues and different formats. And even just getting that data together and normalized to be able to compare it is almost impossible. Obviously, for Mark and for Two Sigma, that won't be the case, but for many, many hedge funds out there, that is a huge challenge. And so being able to create that kind of lake, Roy, one thing I think that's interesting, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this when you ask about creating that sort of all-encompassed data, which is super important and drives so many things, is the financial data is in an infancy stage of like its evolution, which I think if you look at that on the surface with Bloomberg and all these data sources and real live feeds, you'd think, yeah, we've been doing financial data forever. But in reality, I think it's actually at the beginning of a huge explosion in the market. And data for a client on a hedge fund it makes them smarter. It helps them tackle really anything. And frankly, it makes them feel like they have more control. You take Archegos and you think, what happens when something goes wrong? You want to see your information and know, where are my exposures? Who am I dealing with? What can I do now? And so having that control is super important. And then the last thing, when we talk about this explosion of data, is security. Because now that we're talking about great sources of data and organizing data, comparing data, you have to protect it. And I think there's an interesting misnomer in the market right now. People feel more secure on their home computers and they're worried about what's going on in the cloud. And I think this concept of transformation to the cloud is in full effect, and that the cloud companies, whether it's AWS or Microsoft Azure, they are spending a fortune on security. So I just want to punchline that point about getting the data and being able to read it and organize is extremely important. And then there's the fact of protecting it.
Right. So thanks for that. I want to go to audience questions now. So to the person that asked me why my eyes keep going all over the place, and I'm not, it looks like I'm not paying attention. That's because I've got my questions over there for the script. I've got the screen over here for the speakers, and the questions are coming up over here. And I was just about to give everyone a prompt to say, please ask questions, because we got about 10 minutes left. And then 3 popped up. So I don't know whether that was just my connection, but I think almost a follow on to a couple of the points we've talked about. The question from the audience is, Archegos has come up a couple of times today. And certainly, it's been a key subject for discussion for, since really it kicked off, because of the financial implications and the questions about data and transparency. So does anyone want to comment on Archegos and would transparency and data availability itself have improved the situation? Could we have avoided Archegos, or what are your thoughts on that? I don't know if there's any takers want to start with that. Chris, maybe over to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I heard what happened, having worked on the sell side, you realize quite quickly that this is a situation that could really happen to any of the banks. And so it's not it's not a one person made a huge mistake kind of issue. I think from a transparency perspective, clearly the biggest challenge in the Archegos situation was just simply understanding how much risk this firm had across the street. And no one had the understanding of the magnitude of where all those positions were and how deeply he was carrying those positions. So obviously, I think the next step off the back of Archegos is going to be further regulation around family offices, transparency, information, because Roy, working in the swap world, those exist for many of the institutions and the hedge funds. And so I think that will be the next step.
Yes, and I still like. Look, I don't know if he came up with the phrase, but the first person I heard say this was Carson Block of Muddy Waters, but he calls it arch egos. So I always brings a smile to my face. Look, I think the fundamental challenge to that question is that the reason, so transparency itself wouldn't have helped because there isn't the regulation there now requiring that transparency. So is the solution or part of the solution transparency? Probably, I think we'd say the answer is yes. We have another question, really maybe for the technology providers. Mark talked about this kind of modular approach and using his phone for everything except making a phone call, which is a perfect analogy. But the question from the audience is that really happening, or is that still something people are just talking about? So I don't know, maybe Ted or Sophie, maybe if one of you wants it. Sophie, I know it was your hand, but it's one of those things like bidding. I brushed my hair. Did I just make a bid at the auction? I don't know. Do I own a house now? I don't know.
You brushed your hair, Roy? I find that hard to believe.
No, I've actually shaved it all off. I have a full head of hair that's down to my waist.
I
shouldn't be throwing stones in glass houses.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, right. So I would like to echo on what Ted was saying earlier, around the module approach. And I really also like the analogy to the iPhone, because there is so much in the system we give our clients, and very often they don't use all of it, right? And I think interesting right now, there is that need to change, to use way more of those functionalities. But the big bang is not possible. So the only way to move forward is to have, on one hand, this strategic vision of where you want to go, in 5 years, in 10 years, but do it step by step by maybe integrated one or a couple of new modules, or maybe just looking into what you have and how much you could maybe change the way you use it to be maybe more strategic, more optimized, more integrated.
Good, thanks. I mean, Ted, one of the aspects of the modular approach is that when you have these big multi-function systems in there, one of the problems I know as a business owner from the past is when the vendor makes a tweak to part of the system that you aren't using, you end up having to do more testing of something that just to make certain it doesn't impact your functionality of it, or you don't do it and risk that it has an unintended consequence. Is that one of the drivers, or is that just one of the benefits of taking a modular approach?
I mean, that's always one of the objections that come up when discussing big enterprise-wide systems, right? That putting in a new module or changing a piece of functionality over here is going to have the unintended consequences across the organization. So absolutely, I think there is a recognition of that as a new, it's not even new, right? But as a need that need for systems to be much more componentized, open as well. So the approach that we're taking is through standardized open APIs, which means that all of our components can talk to each other. It's very easy just to plug in a new component or take one out or upgrade one without impacting the surrounding ecosystem, and that really has to be the approach.
Okay, thanks. So we are being prodded to start wrapping up now. I can't believe it. Surely cancel whatever's after this and let us carry on. But maybe not. So maybe I can ask everyone for their big finish. What are your thoughts on I don't know, the key challenge or the issue or opportunity that you see driving this whole sort of treasury issue? And Mark, since this is a customer-driven business, maybe we can actually start with you. What do you see? What are you going to ask for that's completely unreasonable and impossible to do, but you'll still expect it next week?
Oh, that's very easy. Look, we're continually asking for things to become much more automated. So the continual drive for the straight through process, that everything is, to Sophie's point, is integrated in terms of the posting, the movement, the calculation, the optimization. At the end of the day, the human involvement with the size, scale, and complexity of these books today is very inefficient in itself. So us being able to have that automation at all points in the cycle, from the identification to the movement, to Guido's point, across the modules to Ted and Chris's points, that's really important to us. So full integration, full automation is what we're expecting and we're driving towards.
Okay, simple expectation, Ted. So thanks for that, Ted. What are your thoughts along the lines of what Mark said, or something else?
Yeah, well, I mean, automation is a common refrain, and I mean that's through the life cycle process, pre-trade, trade booking, trade allocation, through to all of the life cycle management and the collateral processes. That's the ideal. The biggest challenge is I would go back to the data standardization problem, getting components to talk to each other correctly, but also getting a standardized language across the industry is going to be a big help for the optimization of the inventory and for revenue growth and cost reduction. So I think that's where we need to focus a lot of efforts. We're doing some work with ISLA around the common domain model. And that's kind of an interesting initiative, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, thanks for that. And that's a really interesting point that came up on an earlier panel, is that, a lot of this is inevitably where we'll end up. The question is, how quickly will that happen? And it's not necessarily an easy path. Thanks for that, Ted. Sophie, maybe to you next.
Yes, so it's very interesting, because during the panel, I think we've all agreed that there is a need for change, there is a need for integration, a need to remove the silos, and a need to view collateral treasury management at every step of a trade, right? It's not sequential, it's not an afterthought, it has to happen. Now, I think we've all also agreed that we are far from being there, and it will take time. But what I would say is it should still be a new mindset. It should be a strategic goal that we aim for. Yes, it will take time, but there are many ways to get there. There is cloud hosting. There are those modules that will make the upgrade and the updates much simpler. So what I would say is, let's not give up. We should not move to a tactical approach because it sounds too complicated. It has to be done step by step with that very ambitious strategic goal of everything integrated and as real time as possible. So that would be my optimistic conclusion.
Thanks, Sophie. Guido, maybe now to you. Don't give up, Guido. Don't give up, I think, is Sophie's message. What do you have to add to that?
The key challenge that we're solving for at HQLX is to solve for interoperability in a fragmented security settlement market. The last thing that we want to see develop going forward is a fragmentation across DLT platforms. And there are a lot of really innovative platforms out there, working in the digital asset space, digitizing cash, commodities, digital assets, et cetera. And I think over the next 2 to 3 years, it's very important that these platforms have a common domain to enable them to collaborate and interoperate. And I think, some of the trade associations mentioned before are doing a fantastic job there. I know ISLA's common domain model work is really progressing. And I love the fact that there's collaboration going on across the trade association between ISLA, ISDA, and also ICMA and likely others. And I think that's really important going forward.
Thanks, Guido. And the last word before we return to Gabriel goes to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. I'm going to build on what Ted said. Data's king. It's early days on data, as I mentioned. we're creating this middleware between the financing world and the hedge funds. The people or the firm that get that right to create that data management system and protect it is going to win, and that's what we're striving for. So appreciate you hosting the panel, Roy.
Okay, thanks to my panelists. Thanks to everyone watching, and over to you, Mr. Frediani.
So I'll call you Mr. Zimmerhansel because Roy, I can't get that one right. Thank you so much. Again, I forgot to mention before we started, Roy has a very exciting venture called Peerpoint, which I recommend everybody to look in on a very regular basis. Chris, Mark been a long time. You never change. Sophie, Ted, Guido, you trying to have my haircut? All of you made this panel another contender for panel of the afternoon. So I'd like to thank you very much. And I will see you in a couple of minutes for the last panel of the afternoon. Thank you. See you all soon.
Thank you.